Good day, everyone. We are third-year students from CBSU Indang Main Campus, and we are taking up BS in International Studies, major in Asian Studies, and we are under Ma'am Rhea Martinez. For today's discussion, we are about to present the gender politics in Asia. The inclusion of gender as a category of analysis in the study of societies and culture in Asia is important, and some notably said it is essential. It is argued by Thomas Lackyer in the preface to Brownell and Wasserstrom's edited volume that there can be no cultural history without a history of gender. The term gender politics has been used in many ways and domains of life, often without being specifically defined. But according to R.W. Connell's definition, next slide please. In the most general sense, gender politics is about the steering of the gender order in history. It represents the struggle to have the endless recreation of gender relations through practice turn out a particular way. He uses the term gender order to define the dominant patterns of gender arrangements and norms in a given society. So what is gender order? Next slide, please. Gender order is the maintenance of the existing order, change, reinvention, or strengthening or challenges existing meanings and practices. We see gender politics being enacted. Gender pervades the differentials of power, and gender politics are played out by those who maintain current gender orders, by those who perhaps even strengthen or reinvent them, and by those who want to change them by creating new meanings and practices. Next, let's proceed to the definition of civic activity. Next slide, please. Civic activity. Civic activity, also known as civic engagement or civic participation, it is defined as an individual's participation in activities which are intended to improve the quality of life in one's community by adding agent of livelihood in security and developing the knowledge and skills needed to address those issues. Civic activity has three types. Next slide, please. First is the electoral participation. It is the freedom of citizens to participate in the formation and procedures of their government through the electoral process. It is the foundation of democracy. Examples are showing support for candidates through displaying buttons, signs, and stickers, casting a vote, serving as poll workers, etc. Next slide, please. Volunteerism. Examples of volunteerism include collecting and donating food to food banks, helping groups like Habitat for Humanity build houses, and etc. Next slide. Last but not the least, activism and advocacies. It involves working to bring about political or social change through increasing public awareness of and support for particular causes or policies. Common acts of activism and advocacy includes taking part in peaceful protests, demonstrations, and boycotts, writing to or meeting with elected officials, contacting print, broadcast, and online media, and petitioning the government or helping to gather signatures for the petition. That's all. Next is Chelsea.
Next is framing gender and social context. Next slide. Next slide. Gender as a primary frame. As a human individual to coordinate effectively, we need shared common knowledge to use a foundation to the joint actions. Common knowledge is a cultural knowledge that individuals assume a shared way of categorizing and defining who self and other is in situation that can anticipate how each persona is likely to act and coordinate actions accordingly. Next slide. Coordination and difference. Defining self and other to focus on finding shared principle of social difference that can use to categorize the communication issue inherent in the organization of social relation drives communities of people to create mutual social category structures based on cultural defined criteria of difference that need to be periodically connected to each other. Sex or gender is a form of human variation that is highly susceptible to cultural generalization. As a primary category for framing social relations, it creates a structure of cultural distinction that is important to sexuality and reproduction, and that delineates a line of difference between individuals who must comply with each other on a regular basis. Next slide. Cultural beliefs about gender. The key categories of perceptions of individuals, including the sex group, act as a cultural mechanism for coordinating actions by associating category membership with generally held cultural assumptions on how individuals in one category are likely to behave relative to those in a different category. These cultural beliefs are shaped stereotypes, as in men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Gender stereotypes are beliefs about how most people view the typical man or woman. Difference need not logically imply inequality. Yet, among groups of people who must regularly deal with one another, difference is easily transformed into inequality through any of a variety of social processes. Once inequality is established between groups of people, however, it will reshape the nature of the differences that are actually perceived as a characteristic of a higher and lower status groups. Gender social meaning as a primary construct for making sense of oneself and others, and these frameworks culturally concept as a distinction that means discrimination establish two different sets of priorities for individuals. That's all.
So moving on, hegemonic and alternative gender beliefs. So there are gender stereotypes that have called the rules that shows that the gender are not just individual beliefs. Therefore, it says that it was actually institutionalized in media representation. So meaning in the images of men and women that were implied by laws and government policies and saw it happens in a wide variety of taken for granted organizational practices. Next, it is content of gender beliefs. So there are gender trait stereotypes emphasizing a candidate's gender-linked personality traits. And then the gender belief stereotypes placing greatest importance on the differing political outlooks of male and female candidates. So while people seized and claimed the universal depictions of the sexes were in fact, it does represent most closely the experiences and understandings of gender by dominant groups in society and those who most powerfully shape our institutions. So mostly the men and the women that we see in gender stereotypes look most like white middle class heterosexual, or they are the one who is in their middle age. Moreover, many of the people also hold alternative beliefs about gender that are shared with a subgroup of similarly minded others and rely on the alternative gender beliefs to guide one's behavior. Next. So how does the gender frame shape behavior? So in the cultural beliefs of shaping the gender frame of one's persons, It concerns about three given questions. First is how does this shaping process, so by which there were reinforcing to a particular desires of a one person. Second is what about the fact that in any given context in which we relate to others, much more is going on than just gender. So in a particular, we typically act in the context of some institutional or organizational framework that suggests specific role identities and role relations. So last is what happens to the gender frame in the context. So to address these three questions, it would first describe how the gender frame itself shapes behavior and judgments, and then turn to how it interfaces with the organizational frame within which individuals act. Next. Next is the effects of the gender frame. So according to the research, it shows that sex categorization unconsciously primes gender stereotypes in our minds and makes them cognitively available to shape behavior and judgment. And that was it. And that was according to Blair and Donati, 1996, Kunda Spencer, 2003. So in the extent, it says that to which gender frame actually do shape our behavior. However, it can vary from negligible to some substantial depending on the nature of the particular situation and our own motives and also our interest. What matter is the extent to which the information in gender beliefs is diagnostic for us in and that it helps us figure out how to act in the situation. And also, research shows that some basic principles guide how this works or how the gender frame works. And lastly, the effects of gender beliefs on an actor's behavior will also be greater to the extent of the actor consciously and unconsciously perceives the game of gender to be relevant to his or own motives or interests, depending on the situation. So next, the fourth.
So next is gender as a background identity. As a background identity, gender typically acts to bias in gender direction the performance of behaviors undertaken in the name of more concrete, foregrounded organizational roles or identities. Thus, gender becomes a way of acting like a doctor or of a driving car. This, of course, is what West and Zimmerman meant by doing gender. So what is doing gender? Doing gender is defined as involving the everyday performance of a complex of socially guided perceptual, interactional, and micropolitical activities that cast particular pursue as expression of masculine and feminine natures. So, for instance, when a male opens a door for a female, it considered being a polite or a gentleman. In terms of doing gender, the male was enforcing an idea of gender through his actions in a particular social setting. So, how do these contextually varying effects of gender frame interface with the specific organizational or institutional context in which our relations with others occur? People typically confront the problem of coordinating their behavior with another in the context of both primary person frame, gender, race, and age in an institutional frame, a family, a university, and a place of work. As a part of the primary person frame, the instructions for behavior encoded in gender stereotypes are exceedingly abstract and diffuse. For now, however, the point is that these institutional roles, even the gendered ones, provide clear instructions for behaviors in a given context than do the diffuse cultural meanings of the primary gender frame. For individuals, as these institutional identities and rules that are in the foreground of their sense
of who they are in a given context and how they should behave in there. Gender, in contrast, is almost always a background identity for individuals. Next slide, please. The interaction of gender frame and institutional structure. The extent to which the gender frame flavors or biases the performance of institutional role identities depends on two general factors. The first one is the salience and relevance of the gender frame in the situation. So what is gender salience? Gender salience refers to the awareness of gender as a categorizing dimensions, and it is important because school-aged children, preschoolers, and even infants readily use gender to process incoming informations. So for instance, Heidi said that her gender was very salient when she was in the social setting of a pub, and consequently she would never order a pint of beer in a pub so that she did not look too masculine in that situation. So basically, the term gendered institution means that there is a present in the process, practices, images, and ideologies and distributions of power in the various sectors of social life. Next is the extent to which organizational rules and procedures constrains individual discretions in judgments and behavior. As we can infer from above, this depends on the gender composition of the institutional context and the extent to which activities and roles in the contents are themselves culturally gendered. When organizational activities are gendered, the background gender frame becomes more powerfully relevant for actors, and the biases it introduces shapes how people carry out those activities and how they feel in the details not clearly specified by institutional rules. On the other hand, feminist scholars have also long pointed out that apparently neutral formal rules and procedures can embody bias in their applications or effect. The gender framing perspective suggests that whether formal personnel procedures do more good than the bad depends not only on the extent to which bias is built into the procedures but also on how powerfully disadvantaging the gender frame would be for women if actors were not constrained by formal procedures. Thus, there is no simple answer to the "are formal rules best?" question, but consideration of the joint effects of the gender frame and organizational frame allows us to specifically to specify how the answers to these questions varies systematically with the nature of the context. The gendered structure of the society can be projected. The argument suggests that the background gender frame the primary mechanism by which material organizational structure become organized by gender. By the same token, these organizational structures sustain widely shared cultural beliefs about gender. To extent the economic, technological, and political factors change these structures and the materials arrangements that they create between men and women. These materials changes create gradual, iterative pressure for change in cultural beliefs about gender as well. Next slide, please. So to conclude, with the aforementioned examples, it is evident that it is difficult to understand the shapes that the gendered structure of society takes without taking into account the background effects of gender as a primary cultural frame for organizing social relations. It is convincing that the theoretical tensions some feel between micro-interactional and institutional approaches to gender is unnecessary. When it comes to gender, the effects of process at one level cannot be understood without reference to those at the other level. Although the gender frame acts through the sense-making of individuals as they try to coordinate their behaviors, it does not more than add textures and details to a structural account of gender and society. Yet, even as people do this, the material changes make those more conservative gender beliefs harder and harder to sustain a meaningful representation of men and women in everyday life. If over time changes in material arrangement between men and women continue to accumulate, the traditional content of cultural belief about gender will gradually change as well. That would be all. Thank you.
So now we will discuss the third part of our report, which is the civic activity and construction of identity in different countries of Asia. We will discuss about different organizations and movements that help to construct the identity of gender in Asia. So now for the first two countries, we have Miss Sheila Sergas to report about that.
Thank you. So first is the women's citizenship and the politics of dress in 20th century in the Philippines. So next, please. So first, it examines the use of women's dress in political independence from the suffragist women's organizations and women's politicians in recent times. Also, the dress and undress form part of women's strategies in improving their political positions and several types of regimes, colonies, democracies, and authoritarianism, and different types of um, the women politicians in the Philippines wore traditional dress in order to present themselves as non-militant, non-aggressive women who glorified the home and motherhood. Next. Also, it examines the and usually that dress it is called the panunuelo and terno. That dress was always worn by the other people before in the 20th century. Next, please. So we have five categories. The first one is the suffragists. Suffragists is the first women politician also wore the terno and the panuelo in public. The performance of modern tasks while attired in traditional dress made a statement that women were still traditional, nationalistic, and the Filipino people. Next is the militant nuns in and out of the habit. Nuns risk their lives and guarded guys and women people who have been suffered of martial regulation, mainly political detainees, laborers, and strike and individuals of minority ethnic companies threatened with lack of their ancestral lands. And the individuals of minority is Soper viewed for her consistency and courageous help for the emperor of martial regulation, and they supported all conquerors no matter ideological role of the secular and political elite, as long as they have been sufferers of social injustice or violations of human rights. And the third one is the Cordilleran and that is the particular aim of shaming the engineered military set to protect them into abandoning the Chico Dam project. The act of undressing was accompanied by
civil disobedience, such as the dismantling and tearing down of the camp. The effect of undress was similar to symbolic capital of the nun's habit. The fourth one is the Emilia Romualdez Marcos and the Terno. And that is the time that she wanted to express herself as a nationalist Filipino who was proud of her heritage, and the need to utilize the traditional culture structure of the women as traditional bearers and national bearers was essential. And also, it is maximize her power in a political space where men dominate the symbol of power on her agenda to justify her husband's authority system and justify her own access power through her husband, an example of a woman's attempt to use for to use for their powers. And the last one is President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. And the last one is Western dress because the choice of revolutionary clothing in the events that led to the People's Power Revolution of 1986 and the ubiquitous yellow t-shirt became a visible symbol of anti-Marcos opposition. Female politicians were called terno, although President Gloria Macapagal was trend toward traditional Filipino clothing. So for the conclusion is the contrast between Philippine Western dress, the dress and Asian dress. Modern traditional reveals men and women as their citizenship position in these types of regimes. And also from colonial to democratic to authoritarian, opposition to our regime means expressing opposition identities. And best expressed usually in distinct forms, dress or undress, women's agendas for gaining citizenship, rights, visibly expressed and dressed that contrasted their rivals, and the perception that women is a wearer of a national tradition, and locates women firmly in the past and denies her agency requires painstaking dismantling. Women also were proactive in using dress to express their protests and to pursue their radical agendas. And that's all for the conclusion. And the next one is, next please. The next is the community-based movements of Japanese women and how mothers infiltrate the political sphere from below. Then, so for that is women's organization women's organization in form in communities. Their members fight together in the same community. They are often aware of problems which motivate them to act, although everyday life in their community. Also in Japanese society, uh, Eto explains that women can win respect by bearing the social status of mothers and also utilizing the power of motherhood. The community-based women's movement in Japan. It also in succeeded in transforming women's private concerns into public concerns. Next, feminist women awareness of gender issues. The outcome of their activities is contributing not only to improving women's situation but also to centered political change. And also the feminist women is i- they are involved to social movements, also typically non-employed, middle-aged married women. They are mostly from middle-class household, have a high level of education and a serious interest in social problems. They are see the concerns that arise from their everyday life as the political issues. Also, they join up fellow women to campaign for changes in their political organization. And also in the Japanese society, although women themselves are still regarded as a second class, as, and as a result for that, it legitimized women's involvement in social movement. But the concept of motherhood is the essential to the female community based on activities to thinking. And also, the feminist community has a grassroots level in the largest component of the Japanese women's movement in terms of both mass mobilizations and the effectiveness of their activities. Next, please. So for the non-feminist movement as the I discussed that already. Next, please. So the question is why ordinary women become politicized. So for that, the Life Club organization operates at the two levels, the large municipal level and the small neighborhood level, with members primarily conducting activities of ongoing in the same areas. And that is it was a policy of the Life Club. All the members should be involved in the planning of the activities and in how the plans are carried out. And however, as the organization become larger, their activities also become increasingly specialized and it became more and more difficult for all the members to be equally involved in every initiative. Individual members can be came to the more committed to specialized activities and also female members gradually gained experience and began to gain a higher level of expertise in how to carry out projects and organize campaigns. Next, next please. I had just classifications. First is they were supported financially by their husbands. Incomes were higher than average. Second, they had a rigorous giving of their full-time jobs, thus sought out activities to restore their self-respect. The third one is political field. It provided them with a sphere in which they could acquire an individual status distinct from their custom role as wives and mothers. And the last one is the satisfaction that they gained from the activities was the reward of their unpaid labor. Next, please. Next. So for the conclusion for that, it has the level of political participation these women had attained was criticized for its gender-blind approach by some feminists. This criticism gave them as non-feminist activities an opportunity to review their activities in terms of gender. And they added women-friendly issues in support of working women to political agenda. The grassroots women became to share their outlook with the feminists. The beginning dialogue between these two branches of the women's movement. And it also hope and it also broader solidarity among a diversity of women as necessary to the promotion of gender sensitive politics. And that's all. And the other one was discussed will be discussed by Rosa.
So the third country is Malaysia, and this section is entitled Healing Bodies of Thought, the State of Gender in the Satya Sai Baba Movement in Malaysia. So before we discuss about the organization, I will first tell the background of this issue. Way back in Prime Minister D.R. Mahathir's leadership in Malaysia, he has this Vision 2020 which aims to improve capitalism, urbanization, industrialization in Malaysia, which means he wanted modernity in their country. But then the consequence of this plan is the negative effects on Malaysia, which are shifting gender roles and loss of morality. And then on his Hari Raya Aidilfitr address, he revealed that he pointed out that the term social ills. Social ills is what he called for juvenile delinquency, like um, child abuse and drug abuse, any kinds of frauds, and any kinds of causing death. And also he considered being a single mother as social ills. And he pointed out that social ills is the root cause of social ills are from the breakdown of family values. And because of that, uh, during 1997, newspaper discussed about the social ills and revealed that many religions and other organizations are planning to make a move about these social ills. They will have a plan to and program about policing, preservation, and rehabilitation of morality. And and the example of this organization is the Satya Sai Baba movement or organization. So first, let's take a look at Satya Sai Baba. So Satya Sai Baba, he was 14 years old when he experienced seizure, and after he woke up after that seizure, he claimed himself as the reincarnation of Shirdi Sai Baba, who is a Hindu deity of Malaysia. And then he is known for his Satya Sai Baba is known for his miracles and materializations. What we mean by materialization is creating something out of nowhere or unknown source. And one of the most famous creation or materialization of him is the Vibhuti or the Holy Ash. And like other other Malaysian religious group, he also taught Sanskritic thought, which is about tolerance and spiritual equivalence. Then let's move on to the Satya Sai Baba movement. So Satya Sai Baba movement is an organization which is global in scope, and it is represented in 140 countries. It was registered during 1984 as a society, and it was called the Satya Sai Central Council of Malaysia. And as of 1995, there are 35 registered Sai worship centers and 13 devotional groups in Malaysia. And these groups are led by men. There are 143 officers, but only 6 are women. So we already seeing some kind of inequality in gender. And councils are composed of middle-class, non-Brahmin, urban Indian men, mostly Jaffna Tamils and Mayalis. So these group of peoples are Indian or has Indian roots. And then like other Malaysian Hindu groups or religious groups, they also want to revitalize and attempts to refine and update Hinduism. Also, they aim to raise the status of Malaysian Hinduism by increasing its consonance with Sanskritic tradition and to abolish degrading folk practices or blood sacrificing, spirit possession, and fire walking. So the organization is not only exclusive to Indian community, but they consider themselves as extroverted cult with expansionist aim, and all of humanity can be part of their organization. So they welcome other people with uh, different belief, because they believe that they can form into one group even though they have different beliefs. And also they promote the promotion of patriarchal bourgeois values as principle of social order. So these patriarchal bourgeois values uh, pertains to the submission of women to men, meaning that the social order or the enhancing of family values will be based on the father of the house or the husband, and the wife will only remain to assist his husband on organizing their family, and will always be subordinate on his husband. So meaning she will always be below his husband. And then the first healer with the that follows the Satya Sai Baba organization is Uncle Murty. So Uncle Murty is a retired office worker in his late 60s. He's married and has adult children. All of their family members are devotees of Sat Sai Baba. And he was 25 years old when he realized his calling as a healer. That time, he has a woman relative who is nearing to die or in the line of death, and then they go over there and perform some chants, and then suddenly he fall into trance. What do we mean by fall into trance is he lost consciousness and then possessed by some Hindu deities, and then because of that the woman was healed and lived for more years. And then he himself does not grow vibhuti from materialization directly, like unlike Satya Sai Baba, but he has this picture of Satya Sai Baba on his shrine on his home, and one day the dust just formed there, or the ash, and he thought that it was only a dust, and then when his wife didn't clean that up, the vibhuti ash or the holy ash started to grow, and that's where he gets the supply of the vibhuti or the holy ash for his healings. So he performs healings and sometimes falls into trance. And then here are the methods that Uncle used in order to heal his patients. First is straightforward advices. Next, elaborate ritual performance, sometimes involving trance. Sometimes his wife prepares herbal tinctures or paste for healing skin conditions. So he only not heal people with some kinds of diseases, but also skin conditions. These are the stories that Uncle Murty solved. First is the family disharmony. Second, skin disease. Third, marital disharmony. And in order to be healed by Uncle Murty, you have to accept the organization's ideology, because Uncle Murty is approved or known in the organization, and they trust Uncle Murty that he has connection to Satya Sai Baba. You have to accept these patriarchal bourgeois values, which means that the men will dominate the family and maintain the organization in the family, and his wife will only help the husband to attain this. She will always be a subordinate to his husband. And then the second healer is Auntie Elizabeth. Auntie Elizabeth, she was born on the suburb of Kuala Lumpur. She is childless widow in her late 60s, born in Malaysia with South Indian Tamil roots, and she was raised as a Catholic with little exposure to Hindu deities. Her persona in practice contradicted the idea of Sai Baba organization, but her practices is within the range of Sai Baba's philosophy. She was rejected by Malaysian organization because, according to them, her leadership is heretic. What we mean by heretic is different from other leaders. And then she claimed that she encountered Sai Baba in 1976. It was when she said that Sai Baba came into her front and chewing some betel leaf. Betel leaf is some kind of herb leaf in India, originated from India, with health benefits. And yeah, her first encounter with Sai Baba. And she don't materialize vibhuti, unlike Uncle Murty. She don't materialize it, but she is using the ash, but he buys it on packets so she can use it in healing. And she also is known like a kind of screen to Sai Baba with direct communication with him. What do we mean by this is some people with sixth sense or open third eye, they are saying that Auntie Elizabeth kinda they resemble each other, yeah. And she also helped women who are victims of oppression and abuse. And one example of a woman that he helped was abused woman by his husband, and she only drew some kind of line in their house to protect her from her husband, and then the husband miraculously didn't stop to hurt her wife. And that the, also she don't follow the ideology of the organization, which is the self-sacrifice and submission. So although she declared herself as related to Satya Sai Baba, she don't follow the organization's idea of male dominance uh, and subordination of women to their husband. So here's the conflict between them. Limiting community. Uncle was recognized by the Sai Baba organization, but Auntie was rejected. So because Auntie didn't practice the ideology of the organization, so the organization don't want to accept her. And Uncle, although some other followers of Satya Sai Baba organization have some doubts on Uncle's healing, they prefer to recognize Uncle rather than Auntie. Also, Uncle stresses the importance of patriarchal authority, the adherence to the organization's dharma. The patriarchal authority is what the organization is pushing, the dominance of male and subordination of female. So, according to Auntie, there is no connection between obedience and relief because uh, she don't uh, she don't require her patients to follow or um, to follow the ideology of the organization, which is the subordination of female to male. And then Auntie was once accused of practicing black magic and using Sai Baba's name in vain, because she is claiming that when she practiced healing, she saw some bad spirits or some diseases that is going out of the body. And then Auntie's financial donation. Some of the organization's followers said that Auntie requires her patients to have financial donation, and unlike Uncle didn't require that. So what can we conclude on this topic is that um, in the religious community, although men and women like Auntie and Uncle has this contribution and healing and helping people, they both has this connection with Satya Sai Baba. The organization doesn't seem to accept Auntie because they want to have this to maintain this ideology of female subordination to the male. And um, because of that, they don't like to accept Auntie. Also, there is some people on that follows Auntie said that Auntie was not recognized by the organization because she was a woman. So there is some gender inequality on the organization. Although they are both human and has this right to practice their religion, they don't seem to like women to dominate the religious community. So the next one is in Thailand. Thailand, gender and religious legitimacy. So we will now discuss about the journey of the first female monk in Thailand. So that first, the Thai Buddhist Sangha. What Sangha means community. So the Thai Buddhist community. So Thai Buddhist community is a male-dominated congregation that has forbidden the entry of females over the centuries. So their congregation is male-dominated, and they don't like women in their community. So We will first talk about the case of Sarah and Chongdi. They are sisters and the daughters of Prapanam Saranarin, and they received their novice ordination on April 28, 1928. So before you became a monk or a bhikkhuni, what do we call female monks are called bhikkhuni in Thailand. And before you become fully a monk, you will first become a novice, which is like a beginner. So from being a nun or a mechi, they call a nun in Thailand is mechi. Female nun in Thailand is mechi. First, you will become mechi, and then you have to have this being a novice monk, and there is a required ordination for that. And after that, you have to receive a full ordination to be totally become a monk. And Sarah and Chongdi was jailed because of that, because they don't allow women to have ordination in Thailand. And that case inspired the Thai Sangha Supreme Council to forbid any monk to give female novices full ordination as Buddhist monks. This rule was implemented in 1928. So during 1928, they forbid any monks to give ordination to Buddhist female monks, which are called bhikkhunis. So here is Damananda Bhikkhuni, a pioneering Thai female monk. So Damananda is her religious name, and Bhikkhuni means female monk. So yeah, her real name is Chatsumarn Kabil Singh, the first woman to receive ordination as female novice monk under the Theravada Buddhists in Sri Lanka in 2001. So because Thailand don't give ordination to women, Chatsumarn Kabil Singh received her novice monk ordination in Sri Lanka under the Theravada Buddhist. So first, before you become a pioneering bhikkhuni in Thailand, you have to have these things. First is proper bhikkhuni training. Second, bhikkhuni community. Third, respect and support from laity and monks community, which these things are not hard to achieve for her because she has proper education. She even taught Buddhism in universities where male monks are studying Buddhism. Next, why does she want to receive the ordination? According to her, ordination was not just for myself. I wanted to be accepted in this country where female ordination has not been accepted for 700 years. So for 700 years, they don't Thailand don't allow ordination for female monks. So on February 28, 2003, she finally received her full bhikkhuni ordination in Sri Lanka together with three other seminaries. So full bhikkhuni ordination meaning that she become totally a monk. And then before that revival, so what is the reason why Thailand don't ordain female monks? It is because the Buddha established the two community, which is Bhikkhu community. Bhikkhu means male monk. He established male monks community before, and 5 years later, he also established the Bhikkhuni Sangha, which Bhikkhuni means female monk. So he's established the two communities for uh, male and female before, but then the ordination didn't spread all over the countries in Asia, and the first the ordination stopped from one person that received the ordination. So because of that, the lineage was broken, and they don't practice it now. And then Damananda Bhikkhuni struggled to revive the Bhikkhuni order. So this is the revival of the Bhikkhuni order. According to the Buddhist discipline, Bhikkhuni order must be ordained by both the Bhikkhuni and Bhikkhu orders, which is not possible because first, the Theravada Bhikkhuni order disappeared when it spread in Sri Lanka. Second, the Bhikkhuni lineage has been broken. So in order to be ordained, the female monks have to have ordination from Bikuni and Biku Sanghas, but Biku community or male monks community doesn't wants them to ordain women because they argue that the lineage has been broken a long time ago and it cannot be retrieved or revivable. And um, even though they don't uh, allow women to have ordination, the Mananda Bhikkhuni still push the improving and still fighting for the rights of the woman. During 1987, it happened the first international conference on Buddhist nuns. So after that conference, the Sakyadhita or the Daughters of the Buddha was formed. It is composed by Karma Lekshet Somo, American female monk, Chatsumarn Kabil Singh herself, Jampat Cedron, who is a German, Aya Kema, also a German. And then these are the major objectives of Sakyadhita: improving education, communication facilities, and ordination opportunities for the Buddhist nuns. Uh, it is their major objective, for, especially in focusing education, because before they don't educate women on Buddhism, and only male are allowed to be taught uh, Buddhism. There is poor education in female nuns. And then here is the Sakyadhita's fourfold. First, recreate a network of communications among the Buddhist women of the world. Second, educate women as teachers of Buddhism. Third, conduct research on women in Buddhism. Fourth, work for the establishment of the Bhikshuni Sangha order to fully ordained nuns, where it does not currently exist yet. Next, the reaction to the Manandas Bhikkhuni. So after his ordination, what are the reactions that she received from the people? First, negative reaction is that they temporarily banned her TV interviews in Thailand. But then afterwards, organization of journalists fight for this thing that the banning of her TV interviews violates their freedom of press and the practicing of religion. Also, Manas Parkpoon, director of the Office of the Secretariat of Sangha Supreme Council, he said that they do not prevent women from receiving the ordination in Sri Lanka, but they will not be recognized by the Thai Sangha as bhikkhuni. So although they don't they are not against he is not against the ordination, but he said that the Thai Sangha will never accept the Mananda Bhikkhuni as a bhikkhuni or a fully ordained female monk. Also, Pradepidilok, who is the vice abbot of the leading royal temple, Wat Bowen Wiwets. According to the Maitishon Thai newspaper, he said that what Damananda or Chatsumarn Kabil Singh is doing is not a way out. She only wants to take revenge for her mother. In her days, the mother also caused a lot of trouble for religion. So being a female monk is and a nun is a legacy of her family. Her mother and her grandmother are also monks and nuns. If Chatsumarn had any knowledge of Dhamma practice and spiritual liberation, she would have known that ordination is unnecessary. Everyone is equal in practicing Dhamma. Forms are not necessary. What matters is in the wind. So according to him, ordination is not important. And however, if the ordination is not important to them, then why they continue to forbid women to have ordination? And then another thing that the Mananda Bhikkhuni do is to keep improving or keep uh, do things for the establishment of the Bhikkhuni order in Thailand. And one of her major step is the creation of the 5-year plan for the Dharma Kalyani. Song Dharma Kalyani is her female monastic community at her temple, with these following objectives: to have a Bhikkhuni Sangha in residence for a minimum of 5 years, to train the Bhikkhunis in residence in Dharma Vinaya, Buddhist discipline, to train the Bhikkhunis to give Dhamma talks, meditation, and other social services. Then, to teach English to the younger Bhikkhunis and other Thai women who are not yet fluent in the language, to provide opportunity for the Thai people to come and practice with the Bhikkhuni Sangha, to provide an opportunity for the international women to receive lower ordination in the Theravada tradition. So on February 10, 2002, she organized the first dual novice bhikkhuni ordination in Thailand at her temple. She ordained Dhammarakkhita Samaneri, which is the person's religious name. Dhammarakkhita Samaneri is a 56-year-old Meiji. Meiji means nun, so 56 years old nun. Meiji for 9 years before becoming a novice bhikkhuni. So before he become a novice or a beginner female monk, she was a nun for 9 years. And then she has diploma in business studies from Australia, worked as a secretary and translator. So also Damananda Bhikkhuni has begun to establish a female monks community in Thailand. Their first activity is the first rain retreat. Rain retreat is called Vasa. In 2003, as fully ordained monk, first year that her temple had the Bhikkhuni Sangha in residence. So in 2003, they already have established the Bhikkhuni Sangha or female monk community at her own temple. And she wants to have many followers or follow her she done or she received full ordination as a female bhikkhuni, and she wants to encourage a lot of Thai women to follow her steps. But Thai women shows no interest in receiving bhikkhuni order. According to her, it is because of their poor social backgrounds and low educational standard, it's, which is the we can pertain to the long history of poor education for women before in Thailand. And there are also well-educated mechis or nuns that don't that are not interested in receiving bhikkhuni order because they are afraid of the male monks of the sangha, because in the bhikkhu and bhikkhuni community or the Thai sangha, um there is this list of rules that only pertains to subordination of women monks over the male, and they always have to respect or give way for the male monks. Also, older mages had no access to higher education back then. During those older mages time, they experienced they had no access to higher education. Then the Manano Bikuni continued to push for and fighting for the female ordination. These are the people who agreed on her or supporting her. First is Pradama Pitika, a respected monk and scholar. Santikaro Biku, American born. Metananto Biku, well-educated monk and medical doctor. Tavivat Puntari Vivat, a former monk, and another Thai monk who gave two Thai women seminary bhikkhuni ordination in 2003 and 2004. So, in order for bhikkhunis to be accepted in Thailand, they need to have a good relationship with bhikkhus. Bhikkhus are male monks. So, although the Bananda Bhikkhuni already received her full ordination as bhikkhuni, they still have to fight for their rights in Thailand because Thailand uh, still not recognize women to have full ordination or bhikkhuni ordination, and because of that, she has to exert a lot of effort to have good relationship with bhikkhus. So she always visited the bhikkhu community, and she has connection from one leader of that community, which has influence on the nation. Then legal scrutiny. This part pertains to her fight for the female ordination, but she emphasized on the fighting on the forbidden of male of monks to give ordination to women back in 1928. So in 1928, they started to forbid monks to ordain women, and that rule contradicts the Section 38 and 80 of the Thai Constitution. Section 80 state has a duty to promote equality between sexes, and then Section 38 pertains to a person shall enjoy full liberty to profess a religion, a religious sect or creed, and observe religious precepts or exercise a form of worship in accordance with his or her belief, provided that it is not contrary to his or her civic duties, public order, or good morals. She also consulted judges about the issue, and they said that the rule remains because nobody has challenged it. Validity of the rule has not been questioned or examined until now. Also, Ms. Rabria Bratpongparit, the leader of the committee set up by board senators, investigated on the possibility of establishing the Bikuni order in Thailand. And it is revealed that the order or the forbidden of monks to ordain female monks did not defy the principle of Buddhism. And the ban issued in 1928 by the Supreme Patriarch should be revoked because it violates the nation's constitution. The National Buddhist Bureau issued a letter in reply to the Senate proposal. According to them, there can never be bhikkhuni ordination in Thailand due to the irretrievable dissolution of the lineage of the Theravada bhikkhuni order and the lack of bhikkhuni preceptor. Therefore, they issued the ban way back in 1928. So, um, even though they have the strong argument that the order was is invalid because it violates the country's constitution, the National Buddhist Bureau did not accept it, and they said that the ordination or the female ordination cannot be revivable or irretrievable because it was the spread of the ordination was broken a long time ago, and there is no person or another female monk that was ordained after the last person. And then the conclusion on this fight of the Mananda Bhikkhuni to revive the female ordination on monk, uh, this is also this also reveals the gender inequality in Thailand, also in the religious community. Um, Even though she has a great argument or a strong argument that could help her win and revive the ordination, the Buddhist community or the Thai Buddhist Sangha will never accept that, and they will not let women to dominate the religious community. All her struggle only only reveals that it will it will always be hard for women to revive or to push their rights, especially in the religious community, because men and also a lot of people from politics, because men is politics is dominated by men, and also religious community affects or influence a lot to the political to the politics. They will never be they will never accept to accept the idea of reviving the um, ordination.
So next is China, which is divided into two parts, which is the consciousness raising among and beyond women's movement activists, and organizing for change and empowerment, the Women Mayors Association. So in 1980s, women movement in China has extended to governmental women movements and other networking movements in collaboration to engage and question the ongoing process of gender norm in Chinese society. So to move on, collective identities, meaning shared sense of belonging to a group, it they found that these collective identities when it was formed within the activist communities. It is shaped by both internal and external forces. Internal political change, meaning that it is the opportunity of organizing and it sets or limits a political boundary. And the external forces, which is the interaction between the women organization. Next slide, please. So, what is the background of this non-governmental organizing? So, early to mid 1980s, a new non-governmental organizing in Beijing was developed as an extension of the women's studies and was established by the All China's Women's Federation. So in Beijing, they first created and disseminated the new knowledge in order to challenge inequality and justice, meaning that they had established the All China's Women Federation to address the situation of gender equality. And and next is United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. It was one of the most important factors in which they addressed during that the UN Fourth World Conference. They addressed those inequality between genders. Next, please. So there were two women groups established in 1990s in Beijing. This was the highlight of the report, which is the East Meets West Feminist Translation Group. This group was established in 1993, and what they do is they translate English activists articles and they translated it into Chinese to manage or to para mapaliit yung gap between the Chinese women movements and para mas mapalawak or maintindihan pa sila ng mga tao o ng mga individuals in Chinese society. Next is the queer woman group or a group of lesbian that started meeting in 1995 to 1996 and they only was established in 1998. So the queer woman group has made a queer pager hotline in 1997 and made a magazine called Sky Magazine in order to establish or publish the discrimination that the queer movement experience. So back then, homosexuality is arrested as a criminal law because it was regarded as hooliganism or ay unlawful behavior. Pero dahil dun sa queer woman group and their advocacy on consciousness awareness, naging aware yung mga tao, and in April 2001, the law against them saying that homosexuality is a crime was categorized as identity crisis rather than perversion. Next slide, please. Slide, please. So there are two factors that made organizing possible. So because of this, women conference and women movements nagkaroon ng political space, and it was and women has the part in politics now. Next is the role of enthusiasm, commitment, and resources. Without this enthusiasm and commitment of these existing groups, organizing will not be possible. Next slide, please. So, new awareness of gender issues, collective consciousness. So, what is consciousness raising? It entails the sharing of personal experience as a means to shifting the focus of problems from the private to the public sphere. So, ina-aware nila yung mga tao na yung mga private issues like I will discuss later, domestic violence is a public issue. Next slide, please. So, the disseminating new interpretation of domestic violence, just like what I said earlier. In 1990, several non-governmental women's organizations in Beijing began to address the issue of domestic violence. So, the Center for Women's Legal Services and Law Studies and the Women Legal Services Center was established. It was established and set up by lawyers to provide assistance and legal counseling by phone hotline and help those individuals who in need of help which experiencing domestic violence, and they help it to take those cases to the court. So in 2000, activism against domestic violence was consolidated and a new organization was created, which is the Network for Combating Domestic Violence. Next slide, please. So what is the areas of activities of Network for Combating Domestic Violence? The network aimed to undertake systematic research. So they made this organization to undertake or to have a systematic research to the nature, causes, and consequences of domestic violence in China. And if it is effective, they will create models related to domestic violence through urban, rural, and medical community projects. And if they have the conclusion regarding with this, it will be a evidence to make a new policy recommendations for the government of China. Next, please. Next slide. So just like what I said, the Network for Combating Domestic Violence has used gender training and media interaction. So in what way they spread information about domestic violence? First is gender training, not just for individuals, but also journalists, reporters, publishers, writers, and also media interaction. Without media interaction, it will not be accomplished because way back then, internet, the people who use internet was only 1%. Next slide, please. So the media who covered this or monitor the gender bias media reporting was Women's Media Watch Network, and it was established on 1996. So the two main roles of this network is to participate and report on project activities through mass media coverage, and to mainstream and understand of domestic violence as a gender power issue. So regarding on how they mainstream and understand of domestic violence, just like what I said earlier, there will be a gender training regarding that. Next, please. So the Stop Domestic Violence website. So just like what I said earlier, there are now not a lot of people who uses internet back then. So the Stop Domestic Violence websites scope is not yet very big. So this website has 3 external users such as the general public, the media, and the victims of domestic violence. So back then there were only 1% of the population who use website. But why is the website is still in there? Because this website is used by media to connect with each other or to communicate regarding about domestic violence in China. Next slide, please. So the part 2 is organizing for change and empowerment, the Women Mayors Association in China. So it happened in 1980 when the reform unfolded. The political landscape of Chinese women movement had significantly changed. One of the eye-catching changes is the emergence and proliferation of women's organization. So in 1980, when the reform unfolded, the increase of women mayors or women who are in politics had begun. Next slide, please. So these are the numbers which are the evidence that it the post-Mao urban development and the rise of women's mayors. In post-Mao era presents a rather gloomy pace, but in 1980, women participation had declined at all levels, but the proportion of women in the CCP Central Committee dropped from 11.4% in 1977 to 4.1% in 1982. Since then, they made steps to make women or to bring women a lot of women in politics. Next slide, please. It will be tackled in the next slides. So several factors in the increase of officials in contemporary China. First is the acceleration of the urbanization process, in which the former rural areas was converted to urban areas. That's why they have a huge need of women who will reign lands or who will be in politics. Next is China's advocacy for participation of non-party person who intellectual minorities and women new in city management. So in mid 1980s. So in there they have parang tinanggal na nila yung dapat born lang na wealthy or male lang or part lang ng majority yung pwedeng tumakbo. Ngayon, pwede na kahit independent party ka, pwede ka nang tumakbo sa posisyon because of the acceleration of urbanization din as well. So next is the joint political effort to reverse the descending curve of women's representation. So during the post-Mao era, the women who are in politics had declined. So in the All China Women's Federation, which is the organization that I said earlier, has actively negotiated with Central Party leadership to get women into politics during the UN Fourth World Conference, which obliged China to implement Beijing Program of Action, to which Chinese government responded by the program development of Chinese women calls for active support to election and to elect women in government position. That's why mas nag-increase yung population ng women in politics because during the UN World Conference nga, in-urge yung China na i-support din yung mga women in terms of political reigns and etc. Next slide, please. So so what is the advantages and opportunities? The advantages that it opened was hindi na kailangan na wealthy or born as red meaning wealthy and come from a well-educated family. Dahil doon, yung ibang women na hindi naman sila galing sa wealthy sa families, nagkaroon din sila ng lugar in terms of work or career. Next slide, please. So the disadvantages is the lack of transparency during the time na mamimili or mag-a-appoint kung sino dapat yung mayor. And next is the respect for individuals in the appointment process. Parang magkasama lang sila. Kung baga, pag election, nagkakaroon na tayo ng mga choices. Parang may lack of transparency. Minsan kasi, may mga connection din yung ibang candidate and yung iba hindi na napipili. Next is isolation. If ever that, for example, there is a party A and party B, and during that time, party A's are only the majority who was elected and you are from party B. So there will be an isolation with regards that you are not part of party A and you are from party B. And regarding for dining and drinking, we all know that dining and drinking is a formal setup in which we can communicate and connect with our colleagues. So naging problema rin naging problema rin siya ng mga women mayors since yung iba, they are not tolerant enough in alcohol, and some of the male colleagues that they have became rude kapag nakakainom na. Next slide, please. So, the inadequacy of institutionalized ways of dealing with working women's issue. So, these are the problems faced by women mayors. First is the no institutional basis outside of the Women Federation to deal with the issues and concerns of women mayors. And next is the Women Federation system does not take individual membership, which makes it possible for women mayors to count on the ACWF or its local branches for individual consultation and support. So, dito, parang during meetings, you cannot say your personal problems or walang face-to-face connection. Kung baga, pag buong meeting, it is only group. Wala silang time to address their personal experiences and etc. or personal problems during sa households or sa kanilang pamumuno. Next slide, please. So, paano nga ba nagsimula yung Women's Mayors Association? So, in October 1983, the mayoral training program, which responded to the institution of China's development reform, aims to qualify China's municipal leaders. So, that time, there was a mayoral training program, just like what I said earlier. They were training regarding to the development or how to be on politics. Women were trained on how to deal with politics. So Tao Silyang is the architect of Women Mayors Association because she has a strong connection and because of her wealth. Next slide, please. So Zhang Ying, unfortunately, I didn't have the picture because when I searched it, there is no picture. So Zhang Ying was one of the founder of the Women's Mayor Association because she was a vice mayor of Yulin City, which attended that training that was said earlier, and she wrote a letter in a national conference for women's mayors, and 100 women were approved or supports that letter that she had. So because of that, in the first national conference of women mayors was held. Because of that, the Women Mayors Association was established, and their conference was held on March 1, 1991 in Hangzhou, capital city of Zhejiang province, in which it was attended by 31 members. Next slide, please. So the Women's Mayor space is a woman's space and its role. So I will just summarize this. So this WMA become a woman's space because dati nga wala silang how do you call this? Wala silang space or wala silang lugar kung saan mailalabas nila yung mga hinaing nila individually because of household or sa work. Ngayon, yung WMA become a woman's space, and ang role niya is para meron ng way yung mga women's mayor to discuss the problems that they face. Next slide, please. So, one of the problems that they faced was appearance, and the concern was the telephone hotline. Kaya nga po nagkaroon ng WMA, and nag-raise sila ng concern about their appearance and the telephone hotline, since dati nga skirt and parang yung mga parang pants, parang hindi, parang dinidiscriminate sila doon. And the second concern is telephone hotline. They have been a telephone hotline para dun sa mga women na pwede na silang tumawag anytime and to share their concerns. Next slide, please. So, popularizing the woman's mayor image. They popularized the woman's mayor's image by letting or by sought publication which highlighted women's mayor narrative as a trustworthy, open-minded, and successful urban leaders. Next slide, please. Because of that, nagkaroon ng mas maraming connection and mas napabango pa yung image ng women. So, after, yung iba pa is empowerment, in which WMA is aware of the disadvantaged position of women. So, they did these three steps. First is work inspection. So, inspection is a way in which nag-inspect sila during that time of work of the women mayors and let them criticize what they did wrong or if they need improvement. Secondly is the networking. Networking is the connection, the set-upping of the connection between other higher ups. Next is access to training. This is a training in which if ever a woman mayor or a woman wants to level up her career or to have a promotion or a change of career. So they have trainings for that. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, what is the connection of civic activity and the consciousness awareness of China and the organizing movement of the Women's Mayor Associations? First is the consciousness awareness. So we need consciousness awareness for people to know what is domestic violence, what are the things that we need to do during domestic violence or hotlines that they can call if ever they experience that. And next is the the queer women group in which they established a magazine in which they share the discrimination. That is why the law has been revised. Next, and for the women's mayors organization or association, it is part of a civic activity because it is part of organizing, and the Women Mayors Association helped other women to have a space in politics, and also they help women to improve their careers and help them during crises such as if ever they cannot say what is happening in their homes and etc. Next slide, please. So the last one is the Singapore No Fire in the Belly Women's Political Role. Next slide, please. So Singapore is derived from the Sanskrit word Singapura, meaning the lion city because of their trademark statue, which is the merlion. So the first leading women advocacy group in Singapore is the Association of Women for Action and Research, which is also called AWARE. Next slide, please. So the political role of women refers to women whose leadership in government or non-governmental organization challenge them to be in the public eye and whose belief in advocacies lead to the potential changes in public and governmental policies. So it only tackles about what is the political role of women in which they have also part on a politics which is a male-dominated one, in which they can also improve and advocate and potentially lead changes. Next slide, please. So during the war, women volunteers managed the feeding centers set up by the colonial government to cater to the thousands of children who roamed the street looking for food. So during the wartime, women started a feeding program or feeding centers to help those in need. Next slide, please. So in 1952, the Singapore Council of Women was established under the leadership of Mrs. Shirin Fosdar and Mrs. George Lee. It has sought to change the status quo in the relationship between women and men. Since nga that time, meron pa ring discrimination between women and men, and they sought to be on equal grounds. Next slide, please. So Mrs. Elizabeth Choi was a wartime heroine, and nagtangka siyang magkaroon ng position in the in the council, but she was unsuccessful. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, Mrs. Robert Yu Phyllis, or also called Phyllis Yu Cheng Li, she was the first woman to win a seat in city council. She also formed a non-partisan Singapore League of Women Voters. So after ni Mrs. Elizabeth Choi, siya naman yung sumunod na nagtangka na magkaroon ng posisyon sa city council and nagtagumpay nga siya. So Singaporean Women Federation in 1995, it aims in uniting all women and striving for equal and political status in society. So they aim to have a equal grounds between women and men then as well. And they were banned by British because they thought they were a communist front group. So the People's Action Party is one of the party in Singapore in which they also had a women league, and during the International Women Day in 1956, they organized a rally attended by 100,000 women. 10,000 women. So next is the Women Charter Bill. It contains provision regarding offenses against women and girls. So the Women Charter Bill, which was passed in 1961, is a bill in which regards the provision of registration of marriage, divorce, maintenance of wife and children, minimum age of marriage. Since back then, even younger girls can be married, and, and they raised the marriageable age, which is 18, but with parents' consent as well. So also, they have provided that monogamy is wrong, and you should have only one partner, and and you can sue them for bigamy or adultery. Next slide, please. Ay, hindi pa pala. Two political parties in Singapore, which is the Political Action Party and the Barisan Socialist Front. So during that time, there are the two parties, but the Barisan Socialist Front boycotted the election from 1970 to 1984, which is a striking phenomenon, making phenomenon at the West, making it that feminist ideas, yung biglang naglaho yung feminist ideas because the Barisan Socialist Front has boycotted the election. Kaya dati kasi, yung mga women is pinaglalaban nila yung political rights nila bilang part ng government. Ngayon, dahil wala na yung Barisan Socialist Front, yung People's Action Party naman yung nanalo, and inignore na nila yung women, parang hindi na nila pinatakbo yung ibang women. And mostly, male-dominated na ulit yung political sphere. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Next slide. So, possible reasons behind the lack of political participation. So, first is the allocation of resources according to centrally coordinated programs rather than competitive bargaining or political confrontation. Just like what I said earlier, dati nagkaroon ng two parties, but only the PAP or only the POP is the one remaining. So there will no competitive bargaining and political confrontation kasi sila na lang yung mananalo kung sino yung ihahalal nila or who will they elect, yun na lang yung mananalo. So depolitization of the citizenry. Depolitization meaning remove from political activity or influence or no political connection. So during that time, the lack of participation, parang yung mga citizens, they was removed, or because that PAP was the only party existed, they only choose who they want and they will automatically win. So augmentation of the power and scope of the bureaucracy with civil service as the preferred path to political involvement. So now, women or other individuals has different career paths, and sometimes they do not prepare political involvement. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So the last part is the change in the material culture. Materialistic values promotes a generalized sense of betterment and improvement, social mobility. Its transforming qualities on human lives has been recognized as progress. So back then in time, because women or other individuals has no particular interest in politics, they increased in materialistic values and consumption. Back then, shopping malls were regarded or was named or labeled as a sacred religious character for people, and mas gusto pa ng mga tao na magpunta sa shopping malls rather than ibang careers or ibang career path yung puntahan. Next slide, please. Last slide. So because of this materialistic orientation, yung AWARE or yung Singaporean women, yung organization na yon, parang nag-gravitate yung focus nila about materialistic orientation rather than political. If kung may tatakbo man, halimbawa, pipiliin ng mga tao yung candidate na sa tingin nila na mas magiging beneficial for them in terms of money, economic power, or yung mas, di ba pag election naman, dun ka sa, yung mga platform is magbe-benefit ka. So next slide please. So last slide is the conclusion. So what is the connection of the no fire in the belly of Singapore and political participation? So in civic activity, political participation is one of the major needs, because whether regarding of political participation of women or men, kailangan talaga ng space for women in the male-dominated politics, since women also have their voice, and mas mapapadali sa kung magkakaroon ng women involvement in politics rather than puro male dominated lang. Pero in the case of Singapore, the political involvement of women had declined. Hindi gaya nung kanina sa China na mas umangat. And that's end the presentation. Thank you.